that will happen as well with the electricity networks, and you'll start, what the utilities are talking about is they're talking about peak shaving. And peak shaving is getting the peak demand down. And there are already programs in place to get the peak demand down. I've forgotten what the ESB currently, there's a couple of programs ESB currently have, whereby at times of peak demand, they contact the biggest consumers and they ask, can they reduce their demand? Can they come off the grid in some cases? We run a data centre in Cork. At times of peak demand, we can turn on our diesel generators, come off the grid, and thereby sell demand-side units back to the grid. And thereby we get paid for coming off the grid, and we get paid for selling demand-side units back, and our diesel generators can pump electricity out as well as in, so we can get a net metering effect as well. So peak shaving is when you get pricing signals, the price goes up, and you start reducing your demand accordingly to get the peak down. And if you can get the peak down, it means, as I mentioned, talking about the Australian Open site, with a lower peak, it means less generation facilities have to be built to meet the higher peak. So, peak shaving is one interesting thing. Now, peak shaving in the home will start to happen when you get that pricing information over the smart grid to your smart meter, and your devices in your house start to change their behaviour based on the pricing information. So, for instance, say you have a AAA rated dishwasher or a clothes dryer, you switch them on at 7 o'clock in the evening, you don't care when they're done, as long as it's ready at 7 o'clock the following morning. So your dishwasher or your dryer sits there, waits until the pricing information hits a low, you program it to say come on at 6 cents per kilowatt hour, or come on at 4 cents per kilowatt hour. If it hasn't come on by 6 come on then no matter what the price is, because I need it done by 7. You know, that kind of logic can be built into your systems. And then you just consume electricity when it's at its cheapest. I don't know if you're aware of this, but last year, in 2007, the wholesale price of electricity in Ireland varied from 6 cents per kilowatt hour to €1.16 per kilowatt hour. That's a massive variation, and that variation has never been passed on to the consumer. So people consume regardless of the price, because the price isn't made transparent to them. They have no idea. You know, without that information, you just consume willy-nilly. You turn on your washer, you dry when it suits you, not when it's most economic. So there's a movement now, like on the internet, of going from push to pull. So we'll get a situation where our devices subscribe to pricing information and alter their behaviour accordingly, as I said. So not alone, you shouldn't just think about washers and dryers though, think about other things like immersions. The thermostat and immersions go up or down depending on pricing signals. Or the thermostat in your fridge turns the compressor on and off. So in your freezer, for example, you don't care if the food in your freezer is at -4 or -40. It doesn't matter. So at times when electricity is cheap, you drop the thermostat to -40 or -20 or whatever your freezer is capable of going to. And then when electricity is expensive, it the thermostat shuts down, or the thermostat moves, and the compressor goes off, and you let the price or the temperature of your food drift back up to -8 or -6 or whatever it needs to be. So you're not consuming electricity when it's most expensive, and you are when it's cheap. There will be a situation. It's already happened in France and Australia. There will be a situation when there's so much electricity that it goes negatively priced. You will be paid to consume electricity. This is happening in Western Australia, and it's happened in France. France are an unusual one because they've got so much electricity because they're nuclear, but it's also happened in Australia, in Western Australia. And I've no doubt that it'll happen here, because we've nowhere to put it. We've no interconnects. We've only one pumped hydro station. So, in a demand stimulation situation where electricity is going very cheap or negative, you do things like you heat municipal pools. You heat large bodies of water. That's a spectacular way, because water is a great heat capacitance. And it releases energy nice and slowly back out afterwards. Demand stimulation, the home storage heaters are an obvious one, but also, as I mentioned, fridges, freezers, immersions, as I said as well, the devices, your appliances, like your dishwasher, your dryer. Some loads are not movable. You're going to watch the TV, you know, between 7 and 10 or whatever it is. You're going to cook at whatever time you cook at. Those aren't going to move. You're not going to wait and get up at 3 a.m. and have your evening meal. But that's your choice. As long as the pricing of electricity is made available to you, you make that choice. We're moving to a situation where we're going to have a read-write grid. So again, like the internet, where we move to just consuming from websites, we can now publish back out using blogs. With microgeneration, we'll be consuming from the grid, and we'll also be publishing back out as well. If you have a little wind turbine in your back garden, we'll have net metering in place, so at times you'll be paid to push your own electrical production back out onto the grid, be it from solar panels, or be it from wind turbines, or whatever. The new concept coming into focus called vehicle to grid, which is kind of a peer-to-peer power. This is a photograph of a plug-in hybrid. Plug-in hybrids are still not commercially available widely. Excuse me. I mentioned my Toyota Prius. That's a hybrid, but it's not a plug-in hybrid. With plug-in hybrids, you'll be able to literally bring your hybrid to a power point, plug it in, and charge it. So the idea there is your plug-in hybrids, you plug them in at 7 o'clock in the evening. You don't care when they consume the electricity and when they charge the car, as long as it's available and you want to go to work the following morning. So again, it pulls in electricity when it's cheap or negatively priced. The following day, if it's plugged in again while you're at work, for instance, the vehicle is monitoring the price of electricity on the grid. And if electricity goes expensive, the car decides, well, why don't I sell some electricity back to the grid? So suddenly you're paid for consuming electricity, and you're paid for selling it back out you're paid for consuming electricity, and you're paid for selling it back to the grid as well. This is happening. This is going to happen. The great thing about vehicle to grid is, I mentioned earlier there was no utility scale storage mechanism for electricity apart from the one pumped hydro plant we have here. If there were enough plug-in hybrids in the country, you suddenly have a distributed battery bank for the country. If there were 100,000 vehicles on the Irish grid capable of sucking in power, suddenly you get rid of a whole lot of problems with instability, because it's one giant battery. You build the intelligence in, and it becomes just one battery distributed throughout the country. Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google, is behind this. Google have this thing called Google.org, and they're investing a lot of money in technologies like this, also enhanced geothermal, also wind, and this is a quote I took from a talk he gave recently. I can imagine smart garage, I plug in my car and the computer handles it, I can make money by cost shifting, which is what I've been talking about, solves energy security, energy prices, job creation, and by the way, climate change. So, big supporter, Google are really big behind this. Also, you've got, I've been talking a lot about stuff that's kind of out there next few years, but it's actually not that far out there. This is a device called a current cost meter. They're available online at currentcost.co.uk. There are several others like them. What they do is they give you, in your home, constant feedback on your electricity consumption. So you can just plug it. There's no installation. It clips onto your cable, so it reads the consumption through a clip rather than having to wire it in or anything. And it outputs, you plug it into your laptop, it outputs graphs like this. So this is a typical graph of electrical consumption from a house in the UK, and it's from 1 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock in the evening. And you can see lots of mini spikes, which are probably a compressor in the fridge coming on every 15 minutes during the day. And you get one big one, another big one here. In the evening, around 5 o'clock, probably the oven switching on. And the fact that there are lots of these mini peaks up here would indicate it is an oven with a fan. Interestingly about that, and that curve, I was talking to a woman called Monika Sturm, Dr. Monika Sturm. She's based in Germany. She's head of Siemens Center for Competency Metering Services. And she was looking at this and going, yeah, actually, she said, with this kind of information, we can tell what kind of devices people have in their house. We can look at those curves and tell them the model and year of devices in their house. So there's going to be privacy implications around a lot of this information as well. You can imagine, the utilities saying to themselves, Tom has a fridge from 2002 and the compressor is a bit wonky. Maybe we should, offer him a deal on a new one.